Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. This afternoon, Sunday special, I have with me Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, who's going to tell us whether the much touted about Iran and Saudi Arabia peace deals, talks, negotiations, the way you want to put it, are they actually real or they're just a show for someone to watch? Sir, good afternoon and welcome to the show.
Jai Hind, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me for your show. A very important subject that we will be discussing today.
Absolutely, sir. Let's begin with a little bit of a history, sir. A lot of people don't recognize what this place is all about with regards to the Middle Eastern politics. Um, it's correct me if I'm wrong, but the Middle Eastern politics revives behind or between the relations of these two countries. Isn't that true, sir?
Very true, Adi. The way Islam has expanded was through different routes. You see, one, of course, it was founded in the Saudi Arabian desert. But thereafter, it the influence moved into the areas of Persia, that's Iran, and from Persia into Central Asia, into China, Mongolia. Much of it came into South Asia, into the northern parts of India. And Islam in its old true form remained in the Saudi Arabian desert. India, particularly, received its Islamic culture, the influence of Islamic culture, through two routes. One through the Persian route, which came in, as I just said, to the northern Indian areas of Madhya Pradesh, UP, Bihar, Delhi, and Punjab, and places like that. This was the typical Persian Islamic culture. Filtered, I call it filtered sometimes, because it was filtered with the Persian influence into it. It became very Sufist in nature. And from Saudi Arabia and from the Arabian desert, Muscat, Oman, Kuwait, and places like that, the flow of Islamic influence into southern India. This came by the trader route. This was the more purer form of Islam, not filtered as such, not influenced by extraneous elements. So you find that more, I won't call it radical, very, very fundamentalist in its approach. In northern India, the Islam was much more pragmatic, tolerant form of thing. Now, let's leave out India out of it, right? Let's come back to the Middle East. Now, the Middle East, Islam flourished in this particular way. So let me talk a little bit about it from the origin in the 7th century, 8th century, 7th century, and jump back again into the 20th century. In the 7th, 8th century, Islam got split into virtually two houses. One which favored in an ideology which believed in the lineage of the Prophet and his family. That it is this lineage which only had the right to guide Islam. That segment of the people who believe in this are the Shias. This is the culture which extended more in Persia, which became part of Iran. 98% of Iran is almost Shia today. The other segment is the segment which believes that after the Prophet, in a very democratic way, Islam needed to be led by people who were found suitable to lead Islam. It was not necessarily left to the family of the Prophet to guide Islam. If people know Islamic history, they will know that there were 50 Sahabas who, there used to be the people who used to sit with the Prophet and listen to him. They are the ones who put out all the interpretations into the hadiths, and the first three caliphs after the Prophet were actually from this segment, right? They were all elected, and the fourth was the Prophet's, son-in-law, Hazrat Ali, Imam Ali, right? And Imam Ali became the fourth caliph, and from him the lineage came out of the Shias. remembering the famous Battle of Karbala, where the grandson of the honorable of the Prophet was martyred, and the others. So that it became the Sunni who believed in the not the right of the family as such to guide Islam, and the Shia who felt it was only the family which could guide Islam. So this became the basic point of schism between in Islam and has remained for the better part of the last 14 centuries like that. Let's jump straight. Let's not look at the colonial period in the Middle East, etc. Let's jump to 1979, which I feel is the most
Turning
one of
point.
the most important, one of the most crucial years of the second half of the 20th century. Much of what happened in 1979 continues to geopolitically influence us today. तो जो 1979 में हुआ, and let me switch to a little bit of Hindi also because just we are mixing our thing. You know the languages, two languages that we speak here. 1979 में जो वाकये हुए मिडिल ईस्ट में, उसका इन्फ्लुएंस जो है आज तक मिडिल ईस्ट पर है और दुनिया पर है. 3 वाकये थे. एक था जो मिडिल ईस्ट से कंसर्न नहीं रखता था, मगर it was essentially Soviet invasion of Afghanistan to reach the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. दूसरा था ईरान का रेवोल्यूशन, जहां पर रॉयल्टी शाह ऑफ ईरान रेजा पहलवी को ओवरथ्रो किया क्लर्जी ने. मौलवियों की एक पूरे पॉलिटिकल एलिमेंट ने उनको ओवरथ्रो किया और वहां पर एक रूल ऑफ द क्लर्जी केम इनटू बीइंग इन ईरान. और तीसरा जो था वो था मक्का में ग्रैंड मॉस्क के ऊपर एक रेनिगेट इस्लामिक ग्रुप जो कहते थे इखवान ने इसके ऊपर कब्जा कर दिया और 21 दिन तक इस कब्जे को कायम रखा. सऊदी अरेबिया के पास वो काबिलियत नहीं थी इसको विकेट कराने की, इसके ऊपर कोई छापा मारने की, तो उन्होंने फ्रेंच स्पेशल फोर्सेस को न्योता दिया और वो आए and they carried out a proper, almost like an operation like Blue Star or like Lal Masjid in Pakistan, एक ऑपरेशन किया जिससे उन्होंने इनको वहां से हटाया. इसकी 2-3 चीजें हैं इसमें. सऊदी अरेबिया के अंदर एक बड़ा टेनुअस बैलेंस है बिटवीन द क्लर्जी एंड द रॉयल फैमिली. अब वो बैलेंस जो था एकदम से क्लर्जी के फेवर में आ गया, क्योंकि उन्होंने कहा कि रॉयल फैमिली ने वो सिद्धांत नहीं फॉलो किए हैं फॉर नेशनल सिक्योरिटी, जिससे कि न एक मक्का जैसी जगह पर रेनिगेट आकर उन्होंने कब्जा कर दिया. एंड देयरफॉर द इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ द क्लर्जी इंक्रीज्ड. साइमल्टेनियसली ईरान में ये रेवोल्यूशन हो गया, जहां शिया पावर, द शिया क्लर्जी केम इनटू बीइंग, तो और थ्रेटन फील करने लगे द रॉयल फैमिली पर्टिकुलरली इन सऊदी अरेबिया. और उनका ये परसेप्शन हुआ कि अगर ये थियोलॉजिकल रेवोल्यूशन जो है, आइडियोलॉजिकल रेवोल्यूशन को रोका ना जाए तो शिया का क्रेसेंट जो बन रहा है, एक देयर वाज अ क्रेसेंट कमिंग अप, अजरबैजान, ईरान, कुवैत के अंदर भी बहुत शिया पॉपुलेशन है, इराक के अंदर मेजॉरिटी शिया पॉपुलेशन. ये पूरा इलाका जो है वो ईरान के कब्जे में आ जाएगा, ईरान के इन्फ्लुएंस में आ जाएगा. तो जरूरी है कि पर्शियन गल्फ का जो गल्फ का इलाका है वो सुन्नी आइडियोलॉजी वाला इलाका रहे और इसका उधर का इलाका अफगानिस्तान, पाकिस्तान, भारत की तरफ भी वही सुन्नी सऊदी इन्फ्लुएंस होनी चाहिए. Almost $75 billion was spent by Saudi Arabia to spread Saudi Wahhabi ideology, which is the basic ideology of Saudi Arabia, was to spread it into these areas. And that is how the ancient sectarian conflict, it came to a head in the Middle East just around the time when all the oil crisis was going on. 1973 में Yom Kippur war हुई थी इजराइल के साथ, और ईरान की बिकॉज ऑफ द रेवोल्यूशन बाय द क्लर्जी, ईरान ने अपने आप के ऊपर एक दारोमदार समझा अपना कि पैलेस्टाइन के लिए वो ज्यादा काम करेंगे. अरबों ने पैलेस्टाइन को लेट डाउन किया है और इजराइल को वो एग्जिस्ट नहीं करने देंगे. तो ईरान और इजराइल का बहुत बड़ी दुश्मनी वहां से शुरू हो गई। ये इसका बैकड्रॉप है। और जहां तक हो सके आप समझेंगे कि जहां जहां लड़ाइयां हो रही थी मिडल ईस्ट में, वहां पर ये जो ये जो सेक्टेरियन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है, किसी ना किस तरह इसका इन्फ्लुएंस। अब यमन में देख लीजिए आप, यमन में इसका इन्फ्लुएंस है। जैदी जो है वहां पर, हुतीज जो है, ठीक है, उनके ऊपर किस तरह से ये इन्फ्लुएंस हुआ है। कैसे प्रॉक्सी वॉर यहां लड़ी जा रही है। हिजबुल्लाह, कैसा ईरान का प्रॉक्सी हिजबुल्लाह है यहां पर, और किस तरह से वो इजराइल के खिलाफ लड़ाई लड़ रहा है। तो ईरान और इजराइल के बीच में बॉर्डर नहीं है, मगर एक प्रॉक्सी वॉर तो चल रही है साथ में। आपने देखा कि अरामको के फैसिलिटी, रिफाइनिंग फैसिलिटी जो सऊदी अरेबिया में है, उसके ऊपर एक ड्रोन का हमला हुआ 3 साल पहले। ड्रोन का हमला हुआ, वो कहां से आया? वो भी ईरान ने किया। तो ये लड़ाई है, प्रॉक्सी लड़ाई वहां पर चलती आ रही है बहुत सालों से। और इसके ऊपर हम और आगे बातें करेंगे, इसको और थोड़ा डीपली समझने के लिए। जी
सर, यू नो, इतना बैगेज है, दैट्स व्हाट द मेन थिंग इज, कि ये इज नॉट अ हल्का थिंग, बट इतना विद सो मच बैगेज, इतना सब कुछ होने के बाद भी सर, व्हाई इज दिस हैपनिंग राइट नाउ? व्हाट इज द रीजन सर? इज दिस द साउदीज ट्राइंग टू क्रिएट देयर ओन स्पेस? इज दिस द इरानियंस ट्राइंग टू टेल द वर्ल्ड, देखो भाई ऐसा है, बहुत हो गया अभी, आई एम गोना डू व्हाट आई फील लाइक इट? इज दिस द चाइनीज ट्राइंग टू गेट इनटू द मिडिल ईस्ट? अब इसके इतने सारे कॉनोटेशंस हैं, व्हिच वन डू यू सी fitting well, sir? Let's
और
just
ये
talk about the
जो,
timing and why.
जी 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 बिल्कुल, जियोपॉलिटिकली बहुत डीप इसके अंदर इश्यूज हैं। मैं सबके ऊपर तो नहीं जाऊंगा, मैं जो बहुत अहमियत रखते हैं उनके ऊपर मैं जाता हूं। नंबर 1, ईरान की बेसिक दुश्मनी है जो इजराइल के साथ, क्योंकि इजराइल को अमेरिका सपोर्ट करता है। अमेरिका के साथ तो जानी दुश्मनी इसलिए है कि 1979 में जब ये रेवोल्यूशन हुआ तो 54 अमेरिकन डिप्लोमेट्स और एम्बेसी स्टाफ को, जो ईरान के रेवोल्यूशन जो चला रहे थे, द स्टूडेंट्स ऑफ दैट टाइम, उन्होंने उनको बंदी बनाकर, होस्टेज बनाकर रख लिया। ये 1 साल चला, ये होस्टेज ड्रामा 1 साल चला। इस होस्टेज ड्रामा के वजह से प्रेसिडेंट कार्टर जो है वो प्रेसिडेंशियल इलेक्शन हारे। ठीक है, प्रेसिडेंशियल इलेक्शन हारे वो 1980 में, इसकी वजह से। और इसके वजह से एक बड़ा ऑपरेशन भी किया, जो लोग भूल गए हैं। अमेरिका ने एक बड़ा ऑपरेशन किया डेल्टा फोर्स के जरिए, टू गेट होल्ड ऑफ द हॉस्टेजेस एंड ब्रिंग देम आउट, स्पेशल फोर्सेस ऑपरेशन, जिसके अंदर डेजर्ट के अंदर उनके हेलीकॉप्टर्स एक दूसरे के अंदर लड़ गए, 6 या 7 अमेरिकन सर्विसमैन मारे गए। Actually, this hit American psyche so deeply that America has looked upon Iran as a rogue state in every way. Actually, if you really look at it, over a period of time, Iranian animosity has also diluted. एक बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग किताब है, इट्स कॉल्ड द टू फेसेस ऑफ इस्लाम। ये नोट करिए, टू फेसेस ऑफ इस्लाम, by an author called Stephen Schwartz. Stephen Schwartz is a Jewish American, but जो उसकी समझ है इस्लाम की, मेरे ख्याल में बहुत मुसलमानों को समझ नहीं होगी ऐसा। ठीक है, he is the one who advised America to patch up with Iran. That the threat among the countries in the Middle East, the Islamic nations in this Middle East, the threat is greater from Saudi Arabia rather than from Iran. What happened ultimately, I don't have to go into the full details, but 2001 में जब 9/11 हुआ तो कोई ईरानियन नहीं था उसके अंदर। उस 19 लोगों में कोई ईरानियन नहीं था, कोई शिया नहीं था। It was all from other parts of the Middle East. इजिप्शियन थे, सऊदी थे उसके अंदर। What I'm trying to say, and then after that the war in Afghanistan started. So America, the United States, cannot think beyond its blinkers, right? In every way they will try and put down Iran, and particularly जब ईरान की इनका न्यूक्लियर प्रोग्राम शुरू हुआ So obviously the United States got extremely worried. Saudi Arabia got worried. And they had reason to get worried. तो ये जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट थी ये और कड़ी हो गई. And America swore under any circumstances that they will take out the enrichment facilities, uranium enrichment facilities of Iran and things like that. Iran, Israel को उन्होंने task दिया, Israel ने कोशिशें शुरू कर दी. You remember the very famous what was that particular virus? Not virus, I think, which was tried to try and paralyze the whole refinement process that Iran had been able to achieve at that particular time. But ये सब चीजें चलती रही. ये सब लड़ाई चलती रही. I think 2015, when Barack Obama, I call him one of the most sensible, intellectually oriented presidents that the United States has had for many years, Barack Obama finally reluctantly agreed to what is called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. 2015, 15th of July, this was signed. This was among the big powers and Iran to lay restrictions on the refinement capability of Iran. Because everyone was worried कि ये ईरान की काबिलियत जो है बहुत हद से ज़्यादा बढ़ रही है, इसके ऊपर कोई कंट्रोल नहीं है and things like that. And the American concept of explaining to the world that it's a rogue state, it is not under anyone's control at any stage. The Saudis were worried. And everyone was worried कि कहीं Saudis अपना न्यूक्लियर प्रोग्राम ना शुरू कर दें. खास तौर पे किसके साथ मिलकर? पाकिस्तान के साथ मिलकर. पाकिस्तान के साथ मिलकर कहीं कोई वहां का प्रोग्राम शुरू हो जाए. This will give absolutely give a fillip to Pakistan within the Islamic world. And आप लोगों को तो याद होगा, जो सुन रहे हैं हमारे दोस्त, उनको तो याद होगा कि भाई ये जो पाकिस्तानी न्यूक्लियर बॉम्ब है, इसका ओरिजिनल नाम क्या था? Islamic bomb. It's called the Islamic bomb. And they're actually given it this name primarily to draw effect from the Saudis. उसके बाद से पाकिस्तान सऊदी रिलेशनशिप बड़ी स्ट्रांग हुई. अब तो कमजोर हो गई है, वो उससे बड़ी स्ट्रांग हुई. पाकिस्तान का एक इन्फेंट्री ब्रिगेड, पाकिस्तान का एक आर्मर्ड ब्रिगेड, दोनों गए सऊदी अरेबिया. They were the ones who were providing the palace guards for the protection of the royal family. वो यहाँ तक रिलेशनशिप पहुंच गई थी. So this is what the situation generally was. China is a remote entity in this whole thing. China का क्या interest है यहाँ? Their interest is essentially energy. देखिए, if China has achieved 14% growth, GDP growth at one time in its recent history, is because of unhindered energy which has come from Kuwait, from Iraq, from Iran, from Saudi Arabia, all over the Middle East, through the waters of the Indian Ocean, south of the Sri Lankan islands, gone through the Straits of Malacca and on to the eastern seaboard of Hong Kong, and Shenzhen and places like that. तभी तो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हुई, और वही इसी रूट के जरिए, सुएज कैनाल के जरिए मैन्युफैक्चर्ड गुड्स, कंटेनर ट्रैफिक, इसी से तो पूरा उनकी इकोनॉमी इस पर बनी है. अब it is important that today, when from 14% you have come down to 5% growth and 4% growth and threatening to come down even further, this sustained traffic of energy must continue. एक तो आपके पास रशिया से आ रहा है, राइट? एक तो साइबेरियन, थ्रू द साइबेरियन रूट एनर्जी आ रही है आपके पास, ठीक है. कुछ आपको सेंट्रल एशिया से भी मिल रही है, मगर जो मेजर चंक है और टू रीच the and that too, you see, pipelines is one thing, great, no doubt, but pipelines are very vulnerable. The shipping is the most credible and the stable form of supply of energy. Shipping के जरिए आप ला रहे हैं इसको यहाँ, and this is the source from where you're getting it. You don't want your source disturbed. You don't want your source influenced by your enemy. ये नहीं कि सऊदी अरेबिया, ईरान, ये वो सहन, they start looking at the West, that they start looking at the United States. As it is, Saudi Arabia, American relations तो बड़े मजबूत relations हैं. अब अगर ईरान के relations भी बहुत मजबूत हो गए किसी तरीके से फ्रांस के साथ, यूके के साथ, I mean there are other European countries which don't have that kind of enmity with Iran, so then China will have a major problem. एंड बिसाइड्स दैट, अगर चाइना का विजन है अपना कि भाई वी हैव टू बी बाय, याद है आपको 2049 से उन्होंने 2035 ले आए हैं अपना वो जो विजन उनका है ऑफ बीइंग पावरफुल इनफ, स्ट्रांग इनफ टू डिफीट एनी कंट्री इन द वर्ल्ड, राइट? अगर वो विजन उन्होंने अटेन करना है 2035 तक, तो then they can't afford to have obstacles to their growth under any circumstances. So it's important for them to have influence in this area, the Middle East. But they have been a very small bit player here. And the reason for it is, much like what America does, the Chinese in the initial stages have not gone deep into studies of culture, area, organizational aspects. See, it is मैं बड़ा क्रूड एग्जांपल दूंगा मैं कि अगर हमको कहा कि भाई सो सो एरिया है भारत में जिसको कंट्रोल करना है, हमने फौज को भेजा और कहा चलो भाई AK-47 लेकर वहां पहुंच जाओ, सफाया कर दो सबका. That's a tactical way of doing things. स्ट्रेटेजिक तरीका होता है, अरे कॉम्प्रिहेंसिवली देखो प्रॉब्लम क्या है. प्रॉब्लम क्या है? इकोनॉमिक प्रॉब्लम है, यूथ का प्रॉब्लम है, एस्पिरेशंस का प्रॉब्लम है, कल्चर का प्रॉब्लम है. इन सबको सब देखो, ऑल ऑफ गवर्नमेंट अप्रोच को अडॉप्ट करो. ये चाइनीज ने नहीं किया. द अमेरिकन कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ सिक्योरिटी इज ऑलवेज कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव. दैट इज व्हाई द डीप सेट academic excellence which exists in the United States. This we have to recognize. Think tanks, जितने थिंक टैंक्स अमेरिका में हैं उतने शायद कैफे नहीं होंगे. हर नुक्कड़ पे, हर कॉर्नर पर एक थिंक टैंक है, राइट? सो इट इज द सिविलाइजेशनल एस्पेक्ट. सो मेरा सिर्फ कहने का ये है, एक आर्टिकल मेरा आ रहा है, मैंने इसके ऊपर कोई टिप्पणियां नहीं की है. 9 मार्च जब ये साइन हुआ है एग्रीमेंट, तब से मैंने कोई टिप्पणी नहीं की. मैं बस सुन रहा था, देख रहा था, पढ़ रहा था, और मुझे अचंबा हो रहा था कि क्या ये दुनिया क्या समझ रही है इसको. भारत में क्या समझ रहे हैं लोग कि चीन जो है, प्रेसिडेंट शी जिनपिंग की विजिट हुई सऊदी अरेबिया को 15 दिसंबर को, उसके अंदर उनकी कोई वार्तालाप हुआ, और उसके बाद प्रेसिडेंट रईसी ईरान के गए बीजिंग, उनका कुछ वार्तालाप हुआ, और इस बीच में 2 महीने में एक सिविलाइजेशनल सेक्टेरियन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट को का हल निकाल लिया उन्होंने.
एग्जैक्टली
हल निकाल लिया. और ईरान और सऊदी अरेबिया ने क्या कहा कि हम तो भाई अब तो झप्पी मारेंगे, एंड वी आर द ग्रेटेस्ट फ्रेंड्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. ये मुझे कुछ अजीब सी बात लगी. ये कहां से आता है? दुनिया ऐसे नहीं चलती है आगे.
एब्सोल्युटली.
एंड हियर एवरीवन इन इंडिया इज फॉलोइंग फॉर दिस. मैं देख रहा हूं डिप्लोमैट्स हैं, मैं देख रहा हूं इंटेलेक्चुअल्स हैं, वो सब इसके ऊपर लिख रहे हैं, मगर कोई सिविलाइजेशनल डिवाइड पे नहीं लिख रहा है, इस पे कोई टिप्पणी नहीं कर रहा है कि इतनी डीप सेक्टेरियन डिवाइड है, इसको क्या ओवरनाइट ओवरकम कर दिया हमने टैक्टिकली. 2 साल, 3 साल, 4 साल, 5 साल के लिए शायद हो गया हो. चाइना ने अपने कन्वीनियंस के लिए, फॉर इट्स ओन इंटरेस्ट, मे हैव अचीव्ड समथिंग. what are the Saudis looking for? The Saudis are looking for sustained flow of energy. पैसा चाहिए उनको भी मालूम है कि इनकी एनर्जी जो है वो ड्राई अप हो जाएगी. उनको प्रिंस मोहम्मद बिन सलमान ने बड़ी सेंसिबली जो है ये तजवीज बनाई है कि 2030-2032 मैक्सिमम वो पीरियड है जब तक कि सऊदी अरेबिया जो है विल रिमेन वेडेड टू इट्स एनर्जी रिसोर्सेस. उसके बाद the economy of Saudi Arabia should no longer be dependent on this. Of course, it can be substantiated by it, but it cannot be completely dependent on that. और ईरान जो है, it's been suffering from sanctions for years now. मैं ईरान गया था a couple of years ago. It's first of all beautiful country to go to. Tehran is a lovely city to go to. What strikes you is your credit card cannot function anywhere. Network ही नहीं है. It is isolated from the world. तो डॉलर कैश निकालो, हर जगह चेंज करो. अभी you get Iranian currency, अब वो हाथ में पकड़ कर बैठो आप बाद में, if you not been able to spend it. So they were very strange thing. Iran is not part of the international economy of the world community. So the Iranians would love to come on board. America ko chodo, idhar ek taraf chodo. And the Ukrainian conflict has come at such an appropriate time for this to happen. Because now there's a deep cleavage. You have NATO, America on one side, you have Russia, China on the other side. And this is the time when nations in the center can play with their interests, right? Mercifully, we are on neither side, but this is exactly what the Saudis and the Iranians are seeing. That this is the time to take advantage. So no one is sticking to age-old friends. Saudis are not saying, America हमारा दोस्त है, जिंदगी भर हमारा दोस्त रहेगा, we will only stick to Americans. No, they're looking at their own interests. Iran is similarly doing it. The Iranians are wedded to the Russians, right? Russia is आजकल जो drones Russia इस्तेमाल कर रहा है, उनमें से majority of the drones are coming from Iran. Iran से बने हुए drones आ रहे हैं, China से आ रहे हैं,
China is buying drones from Iran, sir.
Exactly. तो ये समझने की बात है, इसी के ऊपर तब दैट इज व्हाई मैंने आदि साहब से कहा कि भाई ये हमको चर्चा करनी चाहिए इसके ऊपर, बिकॉज दिस इज अ सब्जेक्ट व्हिच आई थिंक नीड्स अ लिटिल एक्सप्लेनेशन. आई कुड बी रॉन्ग. भाई देखिए, दिस इज माय अंडरस्टैंडिंग, दिस इज माय परसेप्शन. मैं इसको बहुत डीपली पढ़ता हूँ, इस्लामिक स्टडीज को भी देखता हूँ मैं. मिडिल ईस्ट इज अ कोर एरिया ऑफ माय इंटरेस्ट एट ऑल टाइम्स. दैट इज व्हाई आई गॉट सरप्राइज्ड, बिकॉज आई फाइंड कि भारत में, in India, the understanding of West Asia is simply outstanding. ऐसे scholars हैं, ऐसे diplomats हैं, आप उनसे पूछ लीजिए, they will relate to you. I mean, extempore relate कर देंगे आपको पूरी history of this region. वो उनसे कोई टिप्पणी नहीं आई. One or two very sensible discussions I did listen to, some very, very high quality diplomats, Indian diplomats who have spoken on this. मगर बाकी एकेडमिया से बहुत कम आ रहा है इसके ऊपर. मीडिया के अंदर जो है, the note again did not seem to be that kind which said we try to impose caution on our thinking. It was more enthusiasm than anything else. I failed to see any enthusiasm in this.
So my reading little difference in the sense, the enthusiasm was because thoda sa America got a little kick, which also to me is a big misconception. And my next question to you will deal about the great power, sir. Misconception मेरा क्या है sir, which I want to clarify, that the security umbrella in the region, even now, Middle East में is the Americans. No matter what you say, no matter if the Saudis buy 5 missile systems from China or Russia or whatever it is, they still have the entire security of the region in their hands. So that to me is quite interesting. It's like a fruit picker, and I'm going to use this terminology very carefully. China has been a fruit picker who's gone there, taken advantage of a security cover that's looking the other side, and probably picked out a few fruits for itself and come back. That is it. I don't see anything beyond this particular thing. The Saudi Iranian angle you've already explained, which will cause another question for me, which would be the last before we get into the audience questions. But what do you think about that, sir?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm 100% with you. Chinese understanding of the Middle East, I repeat, is tactical. It's not strategic, right? It's looking at very short-term gains at the moment. It doesn't have a long-term kind of a strategy in place. And they know this, what your initial statement was, they know it, that this is America's playing ground. This is the American playing ground. After all, देखिए यहाँ पर influence जो है, British influence. Let's leave out the American side of it. It is the British, it is the French who have had a lot to do with this area. Colonial period से चला आ रहा है, वो influence चली आ रही है. Most of the areas in the Middle East. So if you go back, let's say 5, 6, 7 years and see, during the height of the ISIS problems, the Russians sent in a small contingent to fight here, right? The Americans, of course, they made sure that the Iraqis were in the forefront. They armed them, the Iraqis fought and against the ISIS, right? And thereafter, there were attempts by President Trump to try and bring in diplomatic, not solutions, but a diplomatic stabilization through what's called the Abraham Accords. Uh, Successful for some time. Thereafter, I think losing influence to a very great extent today. And because of the focus having lifted from here to Ukraine, the Russia conflict, to the Indo-Pacific, etc., you find that this conflicts of the Middle East have sort of gone into the background to some extent. But the American influence continues. It continues here. And you have to remember that this Chinese intervention in the Middle East, in the Saudi-Iran standoff, does not address anything of Israel. हमने इजराइल का नाम नहीं इस्तेमाल किया अभी तक. Israel remains the most significant country. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has not even been looked at, not even been addressed. Without doing that, without understanding that the Chinese are bit players. The Chinese are just bit players in this game. And the Israelis will not allow the empowerment of Iran just because the Iran and Saudi Arabia are today seeing eye to eye temporarily. You must remember in the last 7, 8, 10 years almost, Israel and Saudi Arabia have developed a very strong relationship. Basically, influenced by the United States of America. And in fact, I have attended functions in the Middle East where bonhomie between the Israelis and the Saudis has been amazing. Absolutely. If you go to this dialogue, the very famous Herzliya dialogue on counterterrorism, I have attended that dialogue, and there I was surprised to see. The Saudi-Israeli bonhomie absolutely strong. The Israelis are, this whole conference I attended, they only spoke of the Iranian threat. I was making a presentation on Kashmir. They poo-pooed me and told me to sit down. Their only concern was Iran. And the Indian delegation, we told them, yeah, it's not so bad. Don't keep looking at Iran in this particular manner. But they said, no, you all don't know. Iran, of course, you go to Iran also is very strident against Israel, there's no doubt. So what I'm saying is that the Chinese intervention in the Middle East does not even bring Israel into this picture at all. And without the Israeli footprint here, I don't think you are going anywhere towards succeeding. It is, in fact, creating more schisms, is creating more complexities. The entry of China is probably creating more complexities than resolving problems.
The regular narrative जो था ना सर, ये था कि भाई सऊदी अरेबिया इजराइल को यूज करता है ईरान के अगेंस्ट और ईरान को यूज करता है इजराइल के अगेंस्ट, कि भाई मैं तेरे से दोस्ती करूंगा, उसको बोलता है लिसन इफ यू डोंट बिहेव विद मी एंड दिस एंड दैट. But reality कुछ और ही है. There's something totally different which is actually happening. But so my question is, it's not just these two, sir. There are wars you mentioned, and these are full-fledged, full-on wars. The Lebanese issue is quite bad. The Palestinian issue is quite bad, and Iranians are very, very hardened about it. The Yemeni issue is bad, sir. And I wonder where else these two guys are in context. One thing have people forgotten, that both these guys had diplomatic relations even while the wars were on. So it's
very interesting aspect which you just touched upon. I'm drawing the India-Pakistan parallel. At the height of 1971 war, did we break off relations? No. We never broke. Yes, sir. Today we don't have ambassadorial relations. That's fine. So you restore ambassadors. So you can restore diplomatic relations between two countries and continue to remain as enigmatic towards each other as you have been before.
Russia and USA, for that matter, right now.
Nothing changes. Nothing changes. Why be so excited by this, which I think is a very, very small blip in the whole canvas out here. But one aspect I will also comment upon. It's come at a time when the world is looking at global terror taking a backstep. A very positive thing. very positive thing which has happened to the world after the pandemic is the backstep that the global terror has taken. This situation is not going to last for very long, to my mind. With what's happening in Afghanistan, much of the attention of the world is diverted towards Ukraine, diverted to other areas, और जो अफगानिस्तान में हो रहा है इसके ऊपर किसी की तवज्जो नहीं है. अब अफगानिस्तान में अभी भी वेकेंट स्पेसेस हैं, अभी भी दुनिया के टेरर ग्रुप्स, रेडिकल ग्रुप्स घूम रहे हैं वहां पर. दिस फेमस आइसिस खुरासान ग्रुप जो है, इसके ऊपर मैं एक बहुत डिटेल आर्टिकल पढ़ रहा था 2 days ago. I was surprised the kind of networks that they have been able to establish in this region and the efforts which are going on towards Pakistan. In fact, what is happening with Taliban Pakistan could very well be the ISIS Khorasan group in cahoots with Taliban Pakistan, trying to make an entry into Pakistan, and that happens, it can make an entry into India too. Right? So we are a step away from global terror, let me tell you. It's one big act. Remember, 9/11 shook the world. It's one big act which can happen anytime or anywhere. The indicators are still not so strong for that. But the Middle East, in the Middle East, I don't think the elements which sponsored global terror, which sponsored radical Islam, extremist Islam, have vanished in thin air. They're very much there. They are the very same people in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, and other places which were there. They're quiet for the moment, but they are networked, all of them. Right? This kind of a thing which is happening at the moment will disturb a lot of things. It will disturb a lot of things. And you may find something quite unnatural, unexpected to happen. I can't put my fingers to it at the moment. But something could happen to once again give that fillip. That will complicate the international geopolitical scene to a very, very great extent. To that extent, I do agree that an Iranian-Saudi rapprochement, which perhaps looks at an end to the proxy war in Yemen, a slight dilution in the Hezbollah activities, the Hamas activities, etc., will be positive for the Middle East. There's no doubt about it. It will be. So I'm not taking away everything from here. I am only looking at the long-term aspects of it and the deeper part of it. How deep can this go in determining peace in the Middle East?
What worries me is a big incident in the West somewhere with regards to terrorism or something like that, because if that happens, that's going to be like a pivotal change in the entire game.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely. And the immigrant problem, immigration issues are all there prevalent even today. There has been no integration, so to say, of all those elements who have gone there. They are not integrated. They're still very much, out of society as such.
Yeah.
And anything can happen.
So that's my biggest worry, sir, that these guys can keep coming down, but it's not easy for the Iranians to rope back what they've started, and that's an example we can see in Pakistan. No matter how many times they try and get these guys into control.
My last one point I would like to add is India. Bharat ke liye kya hai isme? Because that's the important thing. After all, if we are speaking as Indians, then we should be looking at the Indian perspective. You see, under the current government, one of the big achievements has been the ability to reach out to the Middle East and establish some very strong relationships. I'll draw the attention of our audience to the beginning of 2018, when we had ASEAN, 10 ASEAN heads coming in as chief guests for the Republic Day parade. 10 days later, we found on the 5th of February 2018, we had Prime Minister Netanyahu from Israel who came in. 4 days, 3 days, 4 days he spent, and then Prime Minister Modi made a dash to Jordan. And from Jordan, he went to Palestine. He went to Ramallah, I think. And from Ramallah, came back to Jordan. From Jordan, he came to UAE. And I think there was the inauguration of the temple in UAE at that particular time, Abu Dhabi. Then he flew back, and immediately after that came the Iranian president. I attended the banquet in Rashtrapati Bhavan, I still recall. And I think a few days later after that, the Jordanian king, King Abdullah of Jordan, came visiting. I attended that function too in the Vigyan Bhavan, listened to the king and listened to the Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I have never seen Indian diplomacy in this mode of 8 weeks. You just see the high profile in and out visits. This actually showed the kind of attention that MEA was giving to this case. Very important. 8 million people, diaspora, $50 billion of remittances every year, not a small sum, right? And then goodwill within the Islamic community, goodwill with the OIC, 57 nation OIC. These are the nations which influence the OIC. These are the nations smaller. There may be bigger nations with much less money, but these are small nations with lots and lots of money. And we had goodwill. They will make sure that an odd mention of Kashmir here and there will come in. We will also make noises about it. That's about all that will happen. Nothing more. Right. So I think we've been able to achieve a lot in terms of our Middle East policy. Our relationship with Saudi Arabia and Iran to a great extent. The Chinese entry, proactive entry into this, to my mind, is a little disturbing. We may have to reinitiate our this initiatives that the government of India had taken, and make our efforts a little stronger to get back into the stride again. Because we can't allow the carpet to be swept from under us, although that can't happen so easily. But every effort will be made. And Pakistan will be involved in the guidance of China. Remember, China has no idea how they have handled the Uyghur issue in Xinjiang, despite Chinese Pakistani influence and advice. That should be reminded to the Middle East also. Let's see, this is how they've treated the Muslims, that many million Muslims in Xinjiang. So I think this is a time for us to perhaps re-energize our diplomacy in the Middle East.
I must say the Ukraine war came at a very interesting point of time in life, sir, when everything decided to just say, Bhaiya, I am changing. Baki sab theek hai, I am changing. Khatam. So
See,
both
the pandemic actually is the cusp.
started, yes, sir.
2020. The pandemic, for us, the Chinese actions on the LAC in April 2020, the so-called Wolf Warrior diplomacy which they followed. Thereafter, if the Ukraine war had not come, things may have gone back to the normal. The world would have been in recovery mode, everyone working towards economics and things like that. The Ukrainian-Russia war came at the worst possible time. And this has upset the entire world order created since 1989 after the end of the Cold War. This has upset it. And that is why we keep talking about an emerging new world order and what will be India's place in that.
Indeed, sir. That's a big question that is actually coming up. Everybody's trying to make his predictions and
Absolutely.
see what's happening. Guys, let's get into the questions. I have some. Please ask more and more questions because this is an intricate subject, as Jansa said. I read a very pragmatic article this morning which spoke about that it's a best opportunity for India, as you were saying. So, uh, you know, I was quite actually amazed that it's actually something that we need to be careful of rather than anything else. So, let's ask some questions. Naveen, thank you so much for your contribution. Uh, Naveen asks, General Sir, after 2 weeks of Saudi-Iran deal, we have seen significant angles, potential implications it might have, but your 1979 timeline brings them all together. Thanks for the perspective.
Thank you, Naveen. That's more of a comment and agreement with me. But let me endorse what you're saying. A lot of people don't look at 1979 on on the geopolitical canvas. This is the perhaps most important year of the second half of the 20th century because from here started the downfall of the Soviet Union. And in 10 years' time, the Soviet Union had collapsed. Virtually
Collapse.
in 1989, the Berlin Wall had fallen. In 1991, the Soviet Union had collapsed. And this affected the geopolitics of the world. So if today you're looking at Ukraine, um, uh, Russia conflict, it's really a direct outcome of what happened in 1979. The Soviets went into Afghanistan, lost, withdrew, and subsequently broke up, offered all the opportunities to NATO, the United States and NATO to expand themselves. The NATO took in the whole of Warsaw Pact under it, did not know the limits to which it must expand. The limit going beyond the limits of expansion into the Black Sea and places like that has brought the whole world to a sorry state that we are in today. This is the inability of NATO to think that Russia would not respond. Which country would not respond? If you were blocked off from the Indian Ocean and you were left as a landlocked state to look at Tibet and look at Central Asia as your areas of access, wouldn't you go to war? This is the way I look at it. You have to leave windows of opportunity always open. Whenever you are involved in strategic issues, opportunities have to be left open for your adversary. That the Americans didn't look at it. And they had all the lessons from life. They had this from the Treaty of Versailles, 1919. Again, they repeated the same mistake. Yeah.
It's. I wonder why people forget history, sir. I mean, even in the
People don't study
Russia-Ukraine war,
history. People don't study history. They don't forget it because they don't study history at all.
even in the Russia-Ukraine war, so the story literally begins on the 24th of February 2022. People don't talk about what happened in 2014, what happened in 15, 16, 18, 20, 21. No, it's 24th February 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. खत्म. आगे बात करो अभी.
You see,
It's quite
Adi, इसमें एक बात है बहुत जरूरी. Geopolitics, most people look at geopolitics, read today's papers, read this week's Time magazine, read this month's some digest, and then everything goes into the kura. They don't have a method of saving these things in little
archives.
files which they have created, groups that they have created anyway. Because, and when you come 10 years later to a particular thing, you don't remember. You need to go back. I'm glad to say I am one person who loves to, the moment something starts happening, I go back. Let me see what happened then. What happened? What are the linkages to this? And that gives you the perspective immediately. So if you ask me just now, if you ask me to rattle off the events from 1947 till 2023 on the Indian security perspective, I can give it to you in one jiffy. Well, remember, it was all timelines in your timeline. So this is my advice to anyone जो भी geopolitics पढ़ रहा है, international affairs पढ़ रहा है, अगर आपकी timeline दिमाग में नहीं है, it's very difficult for you to keep up with a correct perspective of international affairs.
Actually, I'm going to go out of turn and take this one question from a person. He calls himself Group. Okay, thanks, Group. Sir, why has the world misunderstood this? Is the Saudis sending a message to the Americans?
Let me take the second part of this question. Is Saudi sending a message to the Americans? Yes, you have to go into the Khashoggi affair and things like that. There's no doubt about it. Although on the strategic side, America and Saudi Arabia, their interests converge hugely, right? At least the royal family of Saudi Arabia and the United States converge hugely. But the America has also been accused many times of propping up Saudi Arabia, and the accusation has been that because of this propping up, radical elements, extremist Wahhabi Islam, has also found its moorings and its place, and that has not really been addressed sufficiently by Saudi Arabia itself. In the recent years, you found Trump, for example, President Trump's time, a little pressure on the Saudi Arabia was building up. Although Mohammed bin Salman, MBS himself has promised and he has taken a lot of action on diluting the norms, religious, ideological norms within Saudi Arabia, looking at Saudi Arabia beyond a religious, ideological kind of a construct. But on the face, on despite all this, the United States has had an issue. One of the very important aspects of this is the fact that the United States found its own shale gas. You see, the moment shale gas got discovered in America and the technology came in to extract it, you need tremendous amount of water to be pumped in to take out shale gas and things like that. And America became completely self-reliant on energy. The importance of Saudi Arabia started diminishing. And the Saudis were, well, to use a bad word, pissed off very much on this whole issue with America. They expected that this relationship was forever, for life. They're forgetting the basics of international relations. Relationships are always based on interests. At a particular time, your interest and my interest, it has to be balanced out. Only then the relationships last. So I do think, to some extent, the Saudis are sending messages to the Americans. The contention here is absolutely correct. It is sending a message. Maybe not such a serious message. It hasn't, the whole world hasn't gone topsy-turvy because of coming to an understanding with Iran. It actually supports the American stance too. But the Americans are feeling peeved that they are not the ones who have done this. And they couldn't have been the ones to do it because the Iranians wouldn't listen to them. And secondly, the South Americans would have to change their policy to a very great extent if they had to try and broker a deal between Iran, and they would have to overlook the nuclear side of it and things like that, which is not conducive with American policy. The first part of the question, why has the world misunderstood this? I think much of the world does not understand the cultural, religious, ideological, cultural moorings of most conflicts. They look only at the peripherals. They look at the geopolitics. They look at the weaponry. Everyone looking at Ukraine today is looking at the weaponry. Oh, to see the drone, the death knell of the tank, and all kinds of. I'm also studying all kinds of things like that. Who is studying the cultures? No, hardly anyone. Maybe some good academics are studying it. It's when we refuse to study that, the deeper civilizational aspects, then it leads to a lack of understanding of such conflicts.
Because 90% of the battle is that.
Yes, exactly.
The battle between Russia and Ukraine is orthodoxy versus the Ukrainian, I forget the name of that style of church. It's at the end of it a battle of that. And we've seen that getting played out on the street today when the Russian Orthodoxy churches have been banned in Ukraine. So what you're saying actually
Absolutely.
makes a lot of
Absolutely.
sense.
Many times when I have met the
It makes the light bulb.
Iranians, whenever I have met the Iranians in conferences, meetings, I have found a reference that we have made more often. That our relationship with Iran is civilizational. Very important word. Our relationship is not political. It is not economic. It is not social. It is civilizational. Someone should look at this and study as to what is the meaning of civilization. Right? So very deep relationship we have with Iran. And the Iranians keep coming back to us and saying, despite our civilizational relationship, you haven't played up enough to work on that relationship. This is what the Iranians feel about us. Because we have our compulsions. We have to kowtow to some extent to the Americans because of what's happening in the Indo-Pacific, on the Chinese front, etc. And we can't go whole hog in supporting Iran at all times. So, when we are bridging this gap, it creates a bit of a problem.
Naveen, thanks so much for your contribution. General sir, Saudi Iran's Saudi Syria, Russia-China relationship enhancements. Can you comment on the change in balance of power, world order, and it can expedite India-US relationship?
Just keep the question on because it's a longish question. Let me just keep it at the back while responding to it. Yes, it's generally it's a very good question that you have developed here. The Saudi Iran relationship temporarily, I hope, on a hold, with Yemen conflict hopefully behind us with the ceasefire there. The Saudi Syria uh, relationship, to develop it back with Bashir Assad. But I'm told Bashir Assad was to visit Saudi Arabia in the near future, or he's already visited it. There's an improvement going on there. Russia, China, obviously, the Ukraine war has brought about a complete, coming together of these two major powers. It's not a balance of power which is changing. I still think we are far from looking at the balance of power, but the world order is definitely altering, not changing completely. It is transforming. One thing we have to remember, that the world order is always dynamic. It cannot remain static. Otherwise, the world order would be based upon what we call in the armed forces a part one order. That is, आज order निकाल दिया शाम को, tomorrow the unit, all the men will follow that order. No, it doesn't happen like that in international politics, right? Here, you have a set of norms. You have a set of norms by which you're going. For example, on G20, the creation of G20, the G7, and the United Nations itself, different multilateral groupings which are there, all existing and remaining. These are all formalized, reasonably formalized. There is an informal aspect to the world order, which remains dynamic in content all the time. That is what keeps altering. And that is what is altering at the moment. After the pandemic in particular, China, in a hurry, one of the major causes for what is happening in the world today, I think, is also China's hurry. Because if Xi Jinping knows time is limited for him. What he wants to achieve for China, he wants to do it in his own lifetime. And you'll find increasingly as time goes by in the next couple of years, before the 21st Congress, you'll find the Chinese will be more energetic towards achieving their goals or whatever goals that they have established for themselves. And around this ambition of China, you will find many of these equations which you have worked out here, many of these equations will be dynamically changing. I don't see an end to the Russia-Ukraine war immediately, but it can happen. It can happen overnight. It can happen overnight, and there can be a ceasefire and everyone just stops where they are. No exchange of territory, etc. And it will remain in that kind of a negotiation stage for many years. There will be LOC, LAC kind of a deployment which will continue for maybe many, many years to come. Attention will shift from there, come back to the Middle East, and to my mind, to very greatly to Central Asia, to Afghanistan, AFPAC region. Do not consider Pakistan or Afghanistan as benign. What is happening in Pakistan today is the beginnings of another cycle.
Yeah.
I am warning this all the time. People who are talking about vacating Kashmir by the army and things that I keep warning them, do it. Be happy. But remember, these things suddenly come upon you. And you got the wiliest of adversaries who are sitting, जिसको कहते हैं ना ताक में बैठे हैं, हिंदी में कहते हैं ताक में बैठे हैं, or looking at you and watching for opportunities. So India should be very, very circumspect about the decisions it takes. Being on board with America is very important. Being on board with Russia is equally important, but we are finding now, you see what's happening with our relationship with Russia. 5 of our S-400 systems which were to come to us, only 3 have come. 2 are not coming because manufacturing capability is not there, or maybe whatever has been manufactured is going on the Ukrainian front. Many of the spare parts for our tanks, for our aircraft, perhaps are not going to come in the near future. How is it going to affect our Indian relationship, India-Russia relationship? So these are all very dynamic things which will keep happening from time to time. But yes, you're right. World order is changing, and we must remain in pace with this change. to preempt many things which can happen, which will concern India's security.
You touched upon a very interesting subject. A lot of people would want a session on that, sir. The
I think
next
we should have a session on the New World Order at some
New
stage.
World Order, actually, I'm hinting more towards the factor that you let a cat out of the bag saying that this is a new life for Pakistan. I'd add it's probably the last life of the nine lives of the cat, but yeah, it is a new life. It's gonna.
Well, they've had 22 or 23 times that they have gone to the IMF, so they've beaten the cat.
Venki sir, thank you so much for your contribution. He has two questions for you, sir. One, he says, is the current thawing of Saudi Iran frost a result of the fact that they've hit the Nash equilibrium? I,
What is Nash
Interesting.
equilibrium?
The optics suggest that China is a symbolic winner and Pakistan is a net loser. Your thought?
Explain me, what is the Nash equilibrium?
Sir, this is basically, it means basically a decision making sort of a theorem where a state or a player can achieve a desired outcome by not deviating from his initial strategies. So
The
that's
optics
what it.
suggests that China is a symbolic winner and Pakistan is a net loser.
Yeah,
I would
each
differ to
each
some extent.
each player's strategy is optimal when you consider the decisions of other players. It's basically a set plane, if I may.
I would differ slightly on the aspect of China being a symbolic winner, but it appears to be, which is the prime reason since 9th of March why so many people are going gaga on this entire deal. Yes, you're right. That way, it's a symbolic winner, and that symbolism is lasting for some time. But as this gets studied more deeply, academically, it is put under greater scrutiny. So far, we still don't know the full details of the understanding and things like that. It is related to the $400 billion 25-year agreement that Iran has signed with China too, right? Uh, because until we study this more deeply, you really can't say that the Chinese have come to a great advantage over anyone else. Yes, it's an entry of the Chinese in the Middle East. A geopolitical entry of the Chinese in the Middle East symbolically is correct. That it is putting an end to conflicts such as the one in Yemen is an achievement, no doubt. But again, I say it's tactical. Again, I say it is tactical because at the end of the day, we have had ceasefires along the line of control many times. Haven't you seen in Kashmir? And how many times it's been broken? It doesn't take long for it to be broken. First of all, you have whether Iran has a full control over its own, elements which are functioning in Yemen over the Hezbollah, etc. If the Hezbollah becomes irrelevant, what are they going to do tomorrow? Parts that you create, elements that you create, these proxy groups that you create remain relevant and until a particular time. The moment their relevance starts declining in your eyes, they become a nuisance element for you.
May I, sir? So this
Yeah.
is what he meant, and he says basically, sir, it's a two-word change of strategy. For example, the Pakistanis say that India must change its outlooks towards us. भाई अपना तो कर लो ठीक. I mean, it has to be a
Yeah,
give and take
exactly.
sort of a relationship. So in that aspect of it, the Saudis and Iranians have come as far as the point of going to war. Beyond that, there's nothing left now. They are fighting proxies. They are shooting missiles at each other, drones at each other. All sorts of backending is happening. By changing their one's own tactic, it's not going to help. But I personally think that what you said in terms of the tactic itself, it feels like a very light tactic rather than actually long term tactic.
This aspect of the Nash equilibrium is very interesting. No doubt, many times it happens that nations undertake strategic changes for the sake of it. Um,
Yeah.
projection more than anything. For example, Pervez Musharraf 2001, coming for the Agra summit, was a typical thing like this. It was a projection. Nothing would change. It was a projection, primarily, and thereafter many of the actions taken by Pervez Musharraf were a result of the larger than life personality of Atal Bihari Vajpayee.
Hmm.
When Atal Bihari Vajpayee, he was being viewed as the peacemaker, the poetic Prime Minister of India, philosophical Prime Minister of India, who would close his eyes and think about something and put it out, and everyone would go gaga over it. Pervez Musharraf felt himself to be very small compared to that. And he made an attempt to try and be an equivalent statesman of that time. When you look at Nash equilibrium now, when you explain it to me in the correct way, this is one of the finest examples you can look at. And yes, the Chinese therefore obviously were feeling that they were left out of this whole game, and a opportunity was being created in the Middle East because the American attention was first in Afghanistan, Iraq. It withdrew from Iraq, Afghanistan, Indo-Pacific, got out of Afghanistan, hoped to continue to focus on Indo-Pacific, but got pulled towards Ukraine. With all this, the Middle East was in a vacuum. If I was sitting in Beijing, yes, in a strategic circles in Beijing, I would also be looking at it in the same way.
I'm going to take 10 minutes from you extra, sir, because there are some questions that we need to kind of
Yeah,
address. The second question from Venki Saab is that what is your take on the potential impact of a modern and moderate Sunni kingdom of Saudi Arabia on a hardline Shiite is Iran?
very interesting. Very interesting. Because the stark difference which has to be understood. तो समझना चाहिए लोगों को जो
In
first
terms of
category.
in terms of morality, social
Yeah.
justice, and everything, yes, sir.
You see, Saudi Arabia is still ruled by a royal family. You must remember, it's ruled by a royal family. The clergy has an influence, and the KSA has got a wonderful balance between the clergy and the royal family, which doesn't get disturbed. The KSA doesn't. Mohammed bin Salman has been making efforts very gingerly, if you see. His efforts are brave efforts, but very, very gingerly. He has not tried to jump into changes. What happened in Iran in 1979 was a coup d'etat. I mean, it was a revolution which took place. No such revolution is happening in Saudi Arabia. Iran continues to remain hardline and under the influence of the clergy. But then, after all, we have to remember that it is the clergy of Iran today which is coming to terms with the royal family of Saudi Arabia. And the royal family of Saudi Arabia is not going to go ahead with these kind of things unless it has the backing of the clergy in Saudi Arabia. So, to my mind, there is no impact of this differentiation between the two. This, whatever has happened today, has happened with a clear understanding between the two of them. And they are looking at a win-win situation for themselves too. After all, we can't leave that out. They have signed this for a win-win situation for themselves. Iran in particular, because they have suffered because of sanctions, etc. They have suffered, and they want their relationship with China and Russia to flourish in the future. So I don't think I think Iran is not going to change. Ideologically, is not going to change. And I think both countries will learn to live with each other. The only stumbling block is the relationship of Saudi Arabia with Israel. I don't know how that is going to be resolved and how is it going to be seen. Perhaps Saudi Arabia will take a slight step back, and not be seen to be over enthusiastic in pursuing his relationship with Israel. Although it will not want to dilute that relationship, it will not want to dilute his relationship with the United States. It's too advantageous. All the technologies of the world are flowing from there, from that direction. If Saudi Arabia wants to modernize more, have the most modern city of the world created and things like that, it has to depend on American technology, right? And that relationship is therefore not going to go anywhere. Yeah.
No, that's the most important thing. So, and that's why I'm saying it's quite a balancing act that both of them have created for each other.
Absolutely.
I look at it from another way that the Iranians have also found a certain amount of a certain insurance policy within the Saudis, for that matter. That listen, if there's also a communication channel that is opened up, which is, if I may, I mean, they could trust to a certain extent. Because at the end of it, whatever said and done, the Saudis won't want anything to happen to Iran in terms of a war or an all-out attack in their region. So if there is a communication between the West and the Iranians, the Saudis would be a little sober in handling that.
Handling. That's true.
Normally messages are sent across to either very trusted people or enemies, because both of them you can trust to give the right message. That's how it kind of works in these kind of, I don't
Adi,
know, sir,
things
because,
can change. Adi, things can change if there is a ceasefire on the Ukrainian front.
yeah,
That war comes to an end suddenly, and I mean, it can't happen overnight, but if it peters out, you will find focus returning back to the Middle East once again. And that's the time when this situation will be seen much more seriously. To my mind, yes, it is advantageous to have a peace understanding between these two most populous and the largest nations of the Middle East. But to translate it into something permanent is going to be a major challenge.
that is what, sir. I think, Rahul, I'd like to say this. Your question is very, very strong. He's asking about a literally a multiple polar order. I'll get Sir back for that. I won't want to take that here right now, because let's kind of stick to the subject. But here is a dangerous question, sir. What will happen to Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's oil for security and the KSA's very existence if MBS faces the same fate as Saddam Hussein?
See, Raghu, this is a very, very hypothetical question. Saddam Hussein was a villain for various reasons. We know it. The first Gulf War, the second Gulf War.
Second.
He was not only the he was not just the enemy of America. He was equally an enemy of Iran, equally an enemy of Saudi Arabia. I mean, the world. He was a great friend of India, no doubt, but he was generally an enemy of everyone. So you can't really compare him to MBS. MBS is young, dynamic, willing to change, well educated, meeting every personality of the world on equal terms, conversing, and I think he's being seen as the modern face of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Young rulers, young upcoming rulers do make mistakes. His mistake was the Khashoggi affair. It was a huge mistake, and it was a mistake which came out of ego, and that is something which comes out of young people more than anything else. But I think he has learned his lessons, and therefore I doubt MBS is going to suffer that fate. As time has gone by, in the initial stages, MBS's future was looking very tenuous to me. But at the moment, I think he's well emplaced, and almost everyone who was against him has been cast aside. His relationship with America, with President Biden, I know it's terrible. His relationship with Biden is awful. But then who says that Biden is going to last forever? Right? So, so we don't know what happens next year, right? So I think this is more hypothetical at the moment. At the moment, MBS, to my mind, does not face any major threat to his uh,
Having said that, sir,
existence and remaining.
a lot of people do believe on, like if you look at another question that has come, do you agree that democracy and human rights are coming to the Saudis? So a lot of people believe that you message the Americans, they message you back. And that's something which is I think, an innate uh, perception that has been formed. Either F-35s or B-1 or B-2s will bomb human rights out of the Saudi Arabians, and
See,
or Libya will occur.
I do feel Saudi Arabia is changing. It's changing very greatly. It's being nudged to change by the United States. If the United States was still dependent very largely on Saudis for energy, this change would have come at a much faster pace. Today they are dragging their feet. The influence of the clergy is still very, very strong. I do feel there is a slight dilution in the ideological extremism which flows out from these countries. Uh, but a lot depends on what happens on the global terror scene in the future. As we discussed in the beginning, one big act can send the world in a tizzy. After all, till 9/11, who was talking of radicalism? Who was talking of extremism? No one was even discussing it. 9/11 and the whole world became knowledgeable on fundamentalism, radicalism, extremism, all these terminologies started coming into being thereafter. That can happen tomorrow again, right? So at the moment, I think the Saudis are sensible, being they are listening to some extent and understanding that unless they change this, the future of the royal family itself may be threatened to a great extent. After all, there's one thing which has to be remembered by all of us. The Arab world underwent what is called the Arab Spring, 2010 onwards.
That's what.
It failed. It failed to a great extent. It failed. Tunisia had succeeded to some extent. Libya had failed. Egypt had failed. It failed in Egypt. And everywhere else it failed. There will be a second coming of the Arab Spring. Oh, aega. Human beings don't rest just like that. Yeah, there's a restiveness in human beings always. We are just 12 years out of the Arab Spring. It won't happen tomorrow or day after, but it will happen. And the Saudis are preparing. They know it is inevitable कि ये चीज होगी.
Yeah.
जब होगी तो तैयार रहो उसके लिए. Know how to ढील कैसे देते हैं, how to dilute. You know, when governments get stuck for options, they have to know how to deal. Kite flying में कहते हैं ना ढील देना. That is what it is, ढील देना.
You can't pull it all the time.
You can't pull it all the time. You can't. And therefore, I think the Saudis are being very pragmatic.
Just as comments are supposed if a I won't say a nuclear continental ballistic missile is not navigated with precision guiding geospatial information, it will crash on top of the person who fires it. Similarly, if a civilization is not guided by Islamic philosophy, the world will see a tsunami of devastating wars instigated by the West or actually anybody else. If you don't follow your civilization and your culture.
Correct. Very true. This is
Mark, thanks so much. That's a nice comment. He's from Sri Lanka, sir. So
I see. We've got an international audience listening to us. Very nice.
He's quite enthusiastic about India and its how India does things around the place. So it's quite interesting to read his views as well. Sir, thanks so much. This has been I think an eye opener to a lot of people. Slow and steady, I'm sure this will reach a lot of.
I'm glad we could get out of our India-Pakistan and our India-China obsession.
Yeah,
the
world is changing, sir.
Very important area. This area is too important for India for us not to know enough about it.
Indeed, sir. The world is changing, and we need to slow and steady. Of course, what happens is when China also, a lot of people are not interested. Only when something big happens, then you find everybody wanting to know what's happening. In Pakistan also right now, there is some amount of interest, but I guess that is all overshadowed by, Amritpal Singh, and after that, the internal politics of the country. But it's always an endeavor at this platform, at least, to actually broaden the horizon, try and talk about larger issues of global affairs. When this news comes, everybody's excited to know. 10 days down the line, people say, "Yaar, क्या है कोई बात नहीं कुछ नहीं हुआ." Long-term impacts of things like this will actually occur in the future. A lot of us understand the Ukraine war is bad. We haven't seen the first of it because the impact of that war will only be felt next year. On that note, sir, thank you so much. As always,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm very, very happy to have been with you, and we look forward to more discussions of this nature in the future. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, sir.